Good afternoon, Shireen.
Hi, Alan. How are you? Good morning for you.
Yes, I'm very good.
What is the time now at your place?
It's a little after 10 a.m.
Okay. How are you doing?
Good? Very good.
Thank you for joining us today.
Oh, and I must apologize for 2 weeks ago. So I
It's
put
okay.
on,
I heard the sad news. I feel sorry for.
yeah, but I put on triple controls for today to make sure I was reminded. So,
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. So, I think we are good to go. We usually give like 5 minutes for people to join, and more people are
hmm
joining. So,
yes.
in the beginning, we'd just like to ask everyone to write in the chat if you can, please. Where are you from? What's your background and what you do for living? So, for example, I'm Shireen. I could write I'm a consultant or a supply chain or a lean engineer or quality, whatever your job, and what's your company field. So I would write like I'm from a manufacturing company and where I'm from. I would write I'm from Egypt. Okay. So would you please write in the chat where are you from? So Alan gets to know more about you all and what you expect. So we have Ali from Pakistan, GM Media Safety. We have Dr. Muhammad Abu Bakr. Okay. We have quite interesting group. We have Muhammad Kahtani. We have Nasser from manufacturing from Egypt. Okay. We have Mu'taz from Egypt QA. We have Dr. El Samani Malik from Dahran from Saudi Arabia. We have Dr. Lana from Jordan. She's working as assistant professor in supply chain management, ITUC University. We have Sharif El Hinnawi. I know it's hard for you to pronounce the names. PLM business analysts. Okay. Aerospace Canada. Wow. We have Al Jawhara Zuhdi. She's procurement specialist from Jeddah, working in Saudi SICLI, SICLI. So I'm not sure if I pronounced it right. Have different mix. Okay. So I think we have quite mix today. So let's start. Alan, please introduce yourself, and I would like to introduce everyone that I met Alan more than once, usually in the annual event for supply chain. This year it was in Kentucky, last year it was in Chicago. We all learn from him a lot, and I'm thankful for you, Alan, that you accept that you spend part of your weekend with us and you join us today. Thank you. We can't hear you. You are mute, Alan.
Sorry. Um, yes, it's my pleasure to be here, Shireen. I'm happy to see there's a fellow Canadian on the call. I have a slide to do an introduction. I'm going to introduce a little bit about supply chain first. Shireen, you will control the slides, or do I have control?
Yes, yes, Iman will control everything.
Okay, great. Um, yeah, so we can jump right in. I will be talking about supply chain today and digital transformation in supply chain, and just give everybody here an idea of what's happening and what the art of the possible is today. Because when I think about when I started my career, the changes are tremendous. Um, so if we could go to the next slide. So this is a brief introduction, but I'll use another slide to tell you a little bit more about me, and we can go to the next slide. So I want to start off by talking about how I think about supply chains. and then spend some time on today's capabilities in supply chains. I can dig deep into some of those capabilities if the audience has questions. So Shireen, I'll count on you to tell me if there are questions. I don't have the chat open or the Q&A. And then if we're in supply chain transformation or we're embarking on supply chain transformation, what we should be thinking about. Okay, so in my first slide, I always like to start off talking about how I think about supply chains. And I've been, in supply chain for several decades, and I've seen a lot of changes. But there are two ways I really like to think about supply chains and what we're trying to manage in the supply chain. The first way is as an ecosystem. So as you know, an ecosystem is very complex. There are different types of organisms, there are food chains, there are elements, there, is obviously water and oxygen, and there are events that happen in the supply chain or in the ecosystem. Some of those events can be major, some can be minor. But when you put it all together, it's a very complex set of interrelationships. And when there is an event, it's quite difficult to understand what the medium or long-term impact will be of that event. And it's the same thing in supply chain. So when there is an event, and it could be a batch failure, could be supplier late delivery, could be demand increase, all the typical things that happen in supply chains, or it could be something really, really, really big like the pandemic. But most of my career, I haven't had to deal with those types of events. But it's really important to be able to quickly assess the impact of an event. And excuse me, can we go back one slide? Okay, I'll tell you when to advance the slides. Okay, but it's really important when an event happens to be able to assess the impact, short, medium, long term, and to be able to make decisions quickly as to what to do about it. I've always found that it's as important not to overreact to an event as it is not to underreact. And I've seen many large events in supply chain that looked like they were going to have a major impact, but when you did the full assessment, you realized that the impact was not that major and that you actually are better off not doing anything about it. On the other hand, I've seen small events that you wouldn't think would have a major impact on your supply chain, but actually do. So, so that assessment is really difficult. And we'll talk a lot about, what's available today, but basically what we have today, what's enabled today is to create a digital twin of your ecosystem or of your supply chain. And along with that digital twin, if it's done correctly, you do get this capability of assessing your supply chain rapidly and making very smart decisions as to what to do about it. So obviously there's that gives you the possibility of running many scenarios to look for the best solution. It gives you the ability to do collaboration across your supply chain, to run processes like sales and operations planning, and to really be able to understand your full ecosystem. Now, the other way I like to think about supply chains are as flows. And in most of the supply chains I've been involved with, starting from raw materials and components, there are dozens of flows as that becomes a finished product and is distributed out to your customers. And in these flows, you can converge on a manufacturing operation, diverge, and then converge on a different manufacturing operation with different products converging on that operation, and then diverge. So in your supply chain, you see a lot of convergence, divergence, convergence, divergence, and eventually you get into your distribution network. And in those flows, quite often you will come across a bottleneck or, an operation that has an issue, maybe downtime or, maybe low yields or, all the different things that can happen in manufacturing. So it's really important in these flows to manage capacity and understand what your capacity is looking forward so you can prevent these types of bottlenecks that you're seeing in this picture. And so part of your digital twin has to incorporate capacities, lead time variability, a full understanding of your ecosystem, and a full understanding of the flows of product through your ecosystem. And I've always believed, and I know this for a fact, supply chain planning and scheduling of manufacturing operations has a tremendous impact on their efficiency. And in manufacturing, we call that metric OEE, which is overall equipment effectiveness. The higher percentage that you're utilizing your equipment effectively, the better your cost structure will be, and it will prevent you from having to build new capacities, which can be very expensive. There's an expression in the military called "slow is smooth" and "smooth is fast." And so I really believe in your supply chain, there are times when you have to slow down the flow of products through a resource to make that flow smooth. But in the long term, your total supply chain will accelerate in its ability to get product to customers. And this smoothing also gives you much better inventory control and inventory management because you don't have inventory sitting at these bottlenecks. And in my world, I come from the pharmaceutical world, our products expire. So when you have a bottleneck like this, let's say if you have a month of inventory that's tied up in a bottleneck, well, guess what? You're going to lose a month of shelf life. And shelf life is a very valuable part of your product. Okay, there's a really good book I read many years ago called The Goal. It's a very nice story that talks about bottlenecks and how to resolve bottlenecks. That concept still applies today. Okay, if we could go to the next slide. This is just a snapshot of my career. I started off in Europe with a company called Baxter Healthcare. Was on their device side, but then moved to the pharmaceutical side of Baxter. I was recruited. I'm originally from the U.S. I was recruited to go back to the U.S. by Wyeth Pharmaceuticals. About 8 years after I joined them, Pfizer came along and acquired Wyeth. So at Pfizer, I probably had my biggest supply chain job of my career. I had planning responsibility for all of Pfizer, which at that time included animal health and nutritional and consumer. Very exciting part of my career. I left Pfizer to join a big data company that was doing deep analytics in the supply chain space. They were called FusionOps and then changed to Era. And then my last role in industry was with a Danish pharmaceutical company called Leo Pharma. And I was responsible for external supply, contract manufacturing. We were launching a biologic. I had responsibility for that. And then for about a year, I had global technical operations for the company. So in total, I've spent about 21 years in Europe during my career with Baxter and with Leo. And about 2 years ago, my wife's Canadian. She decided she wanted to be closer to her family. So we moved to Canada and I joined Kinaxis. Okay, so if we could go to the next slide, I have 2 slides just to explain to you very quickly who Kinaxis is. So this is the Gartner Magic Quadrant for supply chain planning solutions. And that's what Kinaxis is. We're a planning solution that sits on top of ERP systems and then does all of the end-to-end supply chain planning, for your enterprise and even across enterprises if you're collaborating with contract manufacturing or suppliers. And in this solution, we start with obviously demand planning and forecasting, and then we look at distribution requirements planning and the distribution network. Where we're very strong is in the manufacturing world and capacity balancing and debottlenecking operations. and then all the way to MRP and procurement and sourcing of raw materials and components. So we've always been in that top right quadrant, but this year we had quite a bit of separation from the other companies in that top right quadrant. The company is Canadian. It is almost 40 years old. And so obviously we've evolved quite a bit over those 4 decades. Okay, in the next slide. Just to show you some of the companies we work with. So there's a little bit of a problem in the top right, but that says life sciences. But we're basically in 6 different verticals. We're very present in 6 different verticals with these companies, and you will recognize many of them. We're probably strongest on the right in the life science sector. And the really cool thing about our product, which is called Rapid Response, is it is one product, one platform. So all these companies are doing their supply chain planning on one platform. And that platform is a digital twin of their enterprises and allows, you know, those capabilities that we're talking about. And I'll get a little more into that. So if we could go to the next slide. I see we're having a little trouble with the slides.
Sorry about that. Okay.
Okay, so where were we? And I only have one slide to talk about where we were because I don't want to spend a lot of time on that. But when I started in supply chain, the next slide, this slide basically describes where we were at. We were starving for data. In my first supply chain role, I was getting monthly data. I was in Europe. I was living in Belgium. I was managing a European supply chain, and I was getting monthly data for on-hand inventory, end-of-month back orders, previous month's sales, and then a 6-month forecast. That was all I got, and I got this once a month. So you can imagine, you know, at that end of the month, I was, you know, scrambling to download that data, put it in my Excel spreadsheets and things like that. It was, and we even had some pretty cool tools back then. So in the 90s already, we already had statistical forecasting packages, and optimization was already a capability that, you know, was available commercially. And we even had the first advanced planning systems. But the issue we had with all of those systems, you know, the capabilities were good at that time, but we spent 95% of our time getting the data to feed those systems. And that took a lot of time. So that detracted, you know, from how powerful those tools could be for us. We were really struggling for data. Everybody in every industry was, you know, focused on this. I think for about 15 years, every supply chain conference I went to, one of the key topics of the conference would be end-to-end visibility. So everyone was, you know, pushing for end-to-end visibility. Y2K helped us with that because that pushed companies to upgrade their ERP systems. And as they did that, you know, they had end-to-end visibility in mind. But really, we were starving for data. And even as late as 10 years ago, 15 years ago, you know, that was still an issue. The data was better, but there were still a lot of gaps. So that's what I'm going to talk about now, is what's happened over the last decade or so and the capabilities that we have with that. So if we could go to the next slide. So if I were to summarize where we are today, it would be in the next slide. And that is that we're drowning in data. And I'll talk a little bit about those different data sources. But today we have so much data that we do not know what to do with it in many cases. Now, fortunately, we have solutions that are helping us get there. So it's a good thing to be drowning in data. And we are making a lot of progress in being able to leverage that data. If you think about, you know, the average factory in the US, for instance, and probably in Europe, Middle East, and, you know, all around the world, the average factory is generating 1 terabyte of data every day, and that's a result of Industry 4.0. And so a lot of companies have made decisions, and even 10, 15 years ago, they were making these decisions to build these data lakes in the cloud. So they were getting more and more data. They knew this data was going to be very useful someday. So they built these data lakes where they could store this data for when they would have, the capabilities to be able to leverage it. So if we go to the next slide. So one of the big sources of that data is obviously ERP. So ERP systems have evolved quite a bit over the last 2 decades. Obviously SAP is the dominant one, but there are many other solutions out there: Oracle, JD Edwards, Microsoft Dynamics, and a lot of other solutions that are capturing all of this data real time at the lowest level. And in many cases, companies are implementing the same instance of ERP across their entire organization. When you have the same instance of an ERP system across your entire organization, you have end-to-end visibility. Now, what you do with it may be a different story, but it's there. You can see real-time what's happening everywhere in your company. And so if I go back to my example, not only would I be able to see inventory every day, but it wouldn't just be on-hand inventory. I'd be able to see the batch number. I'd be able to see the expiration date. I would be able to see the location in the warehouse. I would be able to see when it's going to be used in the future. So this ERP backbone has been very important for supply chain. If we go to the next slide. So as I said, based on this, but even if you don't have the single instance of an ERP system, you can still have end-to-end visibility. We have one customer who has 17 instances of SAP, and this is because they've merged and acquired companies over the years, but they have 17 instances. But we've put a planning solution on top of all of those instances, and merge the data so that that company does have end-to-end visibility, even though it's not a single instance of ERP. But as I said, for decades, end-to-end visibility was a major topic at supply chain conferences. I have not seen that as a topic at a conference in probably close to 10 years. So it's a given, and I would challenge you, if you don't feel like in your company you have end-to-end visibility, you need to really dig into that and understand why. And maybe it is because you haven't made that step to a ERP backbone, but that really is a key step, and it will pay dividends over the years. Now, what the next big challenge is, now that we have or should have end-to-end visibility with our own company, is now we need to expand our ecosystem so that our ecosystem includes partners. So that could be suppliers, tier 1, tier 2 suppliers. That could be contract manufacturers. That could be 3PLs and distributors. We have now the data platforms that allow us to share information between companies. And really, what we need to be striving for is not only sharing information, but also planning together, so that when we're running these systems, when something happens in our ecosystem, we can do simulations across multiple enterprises and make the right decision and the best decision for the full ecosystem, including our partners, and not just for our own internal enterprise. And when you create win-wins like that, guess what? You develop really, really strong partners, strategic partners that will support you and be with you for the long term. So if we go to the next slide. So we also have big data, and big data can mean a lot of things, but I already mentioned Industry 4.0. So that has, over the last decade, that has created a tremendous amount of very granular data of what's happening in our manufacturing operations every second. And that data has been used very efficiently through machine learning uh, for at least a decade to really improve manufacturing operations, manufacturing processes, yields, quality outcomes. It's been really heavily used in that space. Our challenge now is to use that in supply chain. We've started, but we have a long ways to go to catch up with manufacturing. And even in manufacturing, they've created closed loop systems. So if something happens within a manufacturing operation, there's a closed loop that actually through controllers adjusts the manufacturing process to get back to where it should be. And I think that's where supply chain is headed. When there's an event in our ecosystem, we will have controllers like cruise control. If you think about cruise control in a car, that will feedback, and keep your supply chain operating at the right speed. And those controls will be almost real time, but those controls will always have the option of a manual override, like, turning cruise control off, or, stepping on the pedal a little bit, or things like that. So they're really there to aid the human, but not to replace the human. We're not there yet. And in many cases, I don't think we'll ever will get there. But we also have the Internet of Things. So right now with the Internet of Things, there's so much more data available, many times more than ERP and manufacturing 4.0. And that creates a huge amount of data that we can leverage. Now, what's really important with this big data, because there's so much of it, is to decide quickly which data is relevant, and more importantly, which data is not relevant. Otherwise, you will waste your time on data that's really not going to improve the performance of your company. And so I've seen examples of big data. I mean, with big data, you can know a traffic pattern in a city at this exact time, anywhere in the world. You can know the pressure of water in the water mains in a small town in the UK and monitor that. You can monitor social media, but you have to decide what's really relevant for you, because there's so much out there that it's impossible to try to use everything. We have an example of a customer who was using AI actually to monitor Instagram posts. And they saw an Instagram post from a famous celebrity about one of their flavors of yogurt. And as soon as they saw that, they decided to quickly start to increase manufacturing of that flavor, because they expected that that would have an impact on their forecast. And sure enough, a week and a half later, the demand did go up, but they were prepared. So that's an example of how you can use big data to help the performance of your company. Now, if we go to the next slide. So forecasting, as I mentioned, we've had statistical forecasting for a long time. But forecasting algorithms have really progressed over the years. ARIMA has become very popular. We now have random forest models. We have R algorithms that we can tap into through Python. There is so much more power in our forecasting capabilities, through those types of modeling and algorithms, and choosing what the best fit is. But we also now do not have to rely solely on historical demand. We can use other signals to influence our forecast. I just mentioned one with Instagram posts, but we can also include economic conditions. We can include weather patterns. There's so much more now that we can use, that if we think it's relevant to our customer demand, we can actually include that and do a much more sophisticated job of forecasting. Okay, next slide. Now in supply chain management, and in pretty much every role I've had from the beginning, I've had three major objectives. The first one is to maintain very high customer service levels. The second one is to manage inventory. And the third has been to keep cost as low as possible. Now, inventory management is a it's a huge task because there's so many different types of inventory in your supply chain spread out over manufacturing operations and market affiliates around the world. And it's always been very difficult, again, to get that digital twin to help you make the right decisions around inventory. Um, Safety stock models have been around for decades where you calculate, what your ideal safety stock should be for a finished good in a country, based on forecast accuracy, service level target, supply variability, and, different factors like that. We calculate a finished good safety stock. But that's just finished goods. And in the worlds I've been in and the supply chains I've been in, finished goods have typically been about 5 to 10% of my total inventory. Most of my inventory was upstream. Today, we have the capability of knowing exactly where that inventory is, how much of it we have, when it might expire, and to optimize that inventory through what we call multi-echelon inventory optimization. So we have tools today that will help you optimize your global inventory, and that might result in a decrease in your finished goods safety stock because you're optimizing inventory around manufacturing bottlenecks and things like that. And usually the net effect of multi-echelon optimization is that your global inventory decreases. It will increase at certain places, decrease at other places, but the global net effect is usually a 10 to 15% reduction in your global inventory. That's a lot of money, and that catches the eyes of a lot of companies. But with multi-echelon optimization, you're doing it in a way that you can still achieve your target customer service levels. Okay, I need to switch to the next slide. I'm seeing an old slide here. Okay, great, thank you. So the other thing we have with big data, especially internal big data, is very sophisticated analytics for root cause and kappa. And for those of you not from the manufacturing world, kappa stands for corrective action, preventative action. So it's very easy today to construct dashboards and infographics where we see very high level views of our company. We see where there are issues. And if we see an issue, for instance, in Egypt, I can drill down quickly into my network in Egypt. I can see which manufacturing site is there an issue at, what's the cause of the issue, is it a supplier issue, is it a late quality release issue, for a batch of product. I can quickly drill down all the way to the transactional level from a very high level view and understand what my issues are. And I can also understand the root cause, and then I can put corrective actions in place. So as I said before, going back to my inventory analogy, once a month on hand inventory, now I can see real-time inventory at the batch level, expiration date, and then really importantly, I can start with the raw material and see every step of how that material moves through the supply chain all the way until it becomes a finished good and sold to a customer. So with that kind of information, you attack the most important thing you could attack in supply chain, and that is lead times. And you have a very granular view of lead times all the way through every manufacturing operation. You see where inventory is forming because of a bottleneck. You see where there's a high standard deviation of lead time for a certain operation. And lead time standard deviation is more important to attack than the average lead time because variability in supply chain kills you. But you can take your Lean Six Sigma teams and put them on inventory, on cycle time reduction and cycle time improvement. And I heard a quote over 20 years ago that I still believe in, and that is cycle time as a single metric is the most important measurement of your organization's health. So think about that. Think about cycle time. Think about the impact on your organization. I guarantee you, if you have aggressive cycle time reduction programs, your organization, your company will become much healthier as a result. So if we go to the next slide, I would say this is the buzzword. So artificial intelligence, generative AI, that's the buzzword of 2023. But let's not forget that machine learning has been around for a long time. I already mentioned how effectively it's been used in manufacturing. It's also being used in supply chain processes to look at things like buyer planner activities. A planner's looking at what they need to procure from suppliers. Those decisions are usually very straightforward. You can automate a lot of them. So with machine learning, you can see, which types of decisions with which criteria tend to happen automatically. And so you can take that work from your buyer planner and give them time to focus on more important issues. Inventory rebalancing. I saw an example of inventory rebalancing within a complex network within North America, where people were doing it manually every day, and they could really only go through 40% of the products to rebalance. With machine learning and artificial intelligence, they were able to automate that task. They were able to go through all their products every day in a very short period of time. So there are a lot of capabilities out there. There are capabilities to create those closed loop systems where if there's an event in your ecosystem, you can automate a recommendation on what to do. And if the complexity is low enough, you can actually even automate the decision of what to do. So that's very powerful. We have to, and again, we have the data to fuel these types of capabilities. 10 years ago, we didn't. So, even though some of the technology was available, we weren't using it effectively. But today it is available. And today we have to be thinking about how to leverage these new capabilities to drive performance in our supply chains. So what's better than having all these things I just talked about? And if you go to the next slide. Having all these things together. So obviously what we're doing, but other companies are also going in this direction, is we're putting all these capabilities into that one platform that I mentioned that we have for supply chain planning. So all these capabilities separate would create issues because then you have to share data back and forth and things like that. That always creates latency and the risk of the data not being pristine. But having all these things together on the same platform, enhancing your digital twin is where the real power is. And if we go to the next slide. So in my career, the planning process in supply chain has always been what we call cascaded. So the beginning of the month, the first week of the month, the markets around the world would be responsible for creating their demand forecast. So they would get the latest forecast history from the previous month. They would run their statistical models, or in some cases it was a manual process. But that first week of the month, they would create a forecast for all their SKUs, all their finished good stock keeping units. On the 8th of the month, there would be a cutoff handed over to, in my world, the packaging operation for the pills, the vials, the syringes. And then they would look at inventory, they would net that out, they would run their production schedule, and they would create MRP type logic for the demand signal for the next upstream site, which would be a tableting facility or a capsulation facility or a syringe filling facility. And then they would do the same netting, they would run an MRP type signal, and they would send that signal to the chemical plant that made the active ingredient for the drug. Okay? Now you can imagine as you're cascading through this process, you're going to hit capacity constraints, short term, medium term, maybe even long term. And as soon as you hit a capacity constraint, you have to iterate back through your planning. So if you think about a monthly S&OP process, it takes a month, primarily because you're spending most of the time during the month after you get that forecast doing this iteration back and forth across your manufacturing operations to balance capacity to come up with a feasible plan. And then at the end of the month, you have your big S&OP meeting and you talk to all the parties involved about, what the plan is or possible mitigation opportunities if there is a supply issue and things like that. But the fact is, with all the big data we have, with the solutions we have, in most companies, S&OP is still a monthly process, which is pretty interesting. And you can think of, in a world where we're seeing more disruptions, taking a month to make a decision really puts you at a disadvantage in being able to supply customers. Now, what we believe on the right is with a digital twin and with sophisticated planning functionality, that as soon as an event happens in your supply chain, you can see the impact on the full supply chain immediately. You can see where your capacities aren't balanced. You can see where maybe you have a distribution center that can't handle the volume. You can see where there's maybe a supplier issue with getting more components. But as soon as there's an event in your ecosystem, you have immediate visibility, but more importantly, you have immediate transparency on the impact across your entire supply chain. So I had an experience early in my days with Pfizer where we had shipped an active pharmaceutical ingredient to China. When they opened the drums in China, there was a issue that we called caking. So it wasn't a fine powder. It had actually solidified on the surface of the drum, probably due to moisture. This product in China alone was a $1 billion product. So you can imagine immediately, as soon as news went out about this quality issue, the email traffic in the organization exploded all the way up to the chief operating officer. Now, my group was responsible for determining what the impact of this event was on the entire supply chain. Unfortunately, it took us a week to do that assessment. So we had a week of hysteria within the company, because of the importance of this product, and emails and spreadsheets and you name it were floating around. At the end of that week, the assessment was we had inventory in Japan that we could move to China and there was no supply impact. So it was a big event that really we were able to easily resolve, but because it took us over a week to figure that out, it just drained a lot of resource within the company, phone calls, emails, you name it, meetings, lots of meetings and stuff like that. In today's world with concurrent planning, I would have seen that impact immediately. I would have seen immediately, okay, this is the issue, but I have inventory in Japan that I can move over, made that decision and implemented that decision before the first email went out. So that's what I talk about when I talk about rapid simulation, rapid what-if analysis, and that drives rapid decision-making. And of course, you need seamless collaboration. In that case, with China, with Japan, with the markets that were impacted by that China might have been supplying besides its own local market. Okay, if we can go to the next slide. So what's really amazing is that with these advanced planning systems and with big data, McKinsey survey last year said that 73% of companies are still using supply Excel spreadsheets for planning. Now, I'll only say three things about Excel spreadsheets. Whenever you see an Excel spreadsheet, you see a process break, you see latent information, and you see a different version of the truth. And as hard as people try to have the same information, the same uploads, there's no way of controlling that. So I had a boss many years ago who had implemented a warehouse management system. Before that, they were using Cardex, the manual system of keeping track of inventory in the warehouse. But he could not get the people to convert from Cardex to the new warehouse management system. And after a few months of frustration, he went in one evening and stole the Cardex. So the next morning, everyone gets to work. They were forced to use the system, and because they no longer had the Cardex. I would argue many decades later that if in your organization you see an Excel spreadsheet being used for planning, go in at night and steal it, because if they're on Excel, they're outside the system, and that just creates just a horrible situation for supply chain. Okay, if we go to the next slide. So I'll end up by saying these are the things that matter the most when you think about digital twins, digital transformation, and supply chain. So the first is you have to get to concurrent synchronization of people, processes, and data across the C-suite. You have to have that single version of the truth in your digital twin, and a truth that people trust, and you have to be able to leverage that for very quick decision making, and even running ad hoc S&OPs. If you're in the middle of a crisis, why not run an S&OP meeting using the live digital twin, making decisions as a group immediately if the crisis demands that? That's the type of capability we need to have. We need to have people first planning, and we need to think about technology that empowers and augments human intelligence. So when you think about machine learning and AI, look at it to help automate mundane tasks to allow people to have more time to spend on the more complex tasks. And then when you think about your ecosystem, obviously the first priority is connectivity and collaboration internally. But when you've achieved that, then you have to think about extending your ecosystem to external suppliers, contract manufacturers, distributors. Okay, and I'm going to stop now for questions. We can go to the next slide. I would invite you to follow Kinaxis, and I would invite you to connect with me and contact me at my email address if you were to have any questions at all that we don't get to during our Q&A today. So I think we have a little time for Q&A. I do not have a hard stop at 5 your time, so we can go as long as you want.
So when you talk about digitalization and the story you mentioned about the plant in China, and it took you a whole week that you can make the decision and you move the inventory from Japan. Okay, that was interesting story. So with the data, you think how long it should take management to reach such consensus or a decision?
Yeah, so that, this actually was an experience that I had about 10 years ago. So we were SAP, we had some parts of the company where we had not yet implemented, but we certainly had it in our manufacturing sites. We had systems, that were supposed to be pulling that data together. But people were working offline in spreadsheets. And so, pulling that data together, obviously we had to pull data from the manufacturing site in Puerto Rico that made the active ingredient. We had to look at anyone around the world who was making tablets out of that active ingredient to see if they had excess inventory. And obviously we had to very much understand in China, what their on-hand inventory was that was good and what their production plans were and all that. And we didn't have a digital twin, so that took time. Um, so yeah, and so it took us, almost 2 weeks by the time we actually executed that decision. But in today's world, so that same company actually is now using our product. In today's world, if that happened, they would make that decision, I would guess, in 5 minutes. They would run multiple scenarios because it's the same platform, very rapid to run a full supply chain scenario, and then make a decision. And you might have to check with your management before you push the button on that decision. But yeah, so it's much more efficient, and you're making much better decisions. You don't have to guess about what did I miss. I got all this information, but I'm sure I missed something, and I don't want that to be an issue 3 months from now. So
So
I see
one
two
question is
questions.
asking you for the inventory management part. I got to know that we can use more AI tools compared to what we have today.
Yeah, I would say with inventory management, I haven't seen AI applied to that yet. Now, it's not that I see all of the AI use cases, but if I was going after inventory management, if I was just starting today in a company, uh, I first of all, I would look at my finished goods safety stocks in my markets. That's single echelon optimization. Those are very easy calculations. You can even do them in spreadsheets. I would do that first just to assess, do I have excess inventory in my markets? I would also do a very sophisticated, well, a very deep lead time analysis of my entire supply chain, from supplier deliveries through manufacturing, distribution, all the way to my markets. I would really want to have a very good understanding of lead times and where I could get lead time improvement. And once I've done that, then on top of that, I would apply this multi-echelon inventory optimization capabilities. Now, that's really more optimization than it is. You could call it machine learning, but it's really linear programming optimization, and that would get you to what the right inventory is to have across my supply chain, from raw materials all the way to finished goods. And then on top of, so that's the way I would approach it, and that's a multi-year effort, by the way, that will not happen quickly. And then I would look at, once you feel comfortable that you have that under control, then I would look at, what AI capabilities are for inventory management. I personally am not convinced that AI will play strongly there, but I'm old, I'm not up to speed. I could be very wrong about that.
Maybe some people use AI for safety stock calculation, for collecting lots of data. Safety
Yeah,
stock
maybe.
update, yes, and demand and
Yeah.
forecasting errors.
Well, I think it's really powerful in demand planning because it will help with demand planning. And the better your forecast is, then obviously the lower your inventory will be. So,
Okay. There is
yeah,
another question
yeah, I
asking
see it.
how can we convince top management of the return on investment for digital transformation benefits? He says benefits seems intangible for finance department, especially in simple manufacturing system.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm not sure what you mean by simple. To give you a full answer, I'd want to spend a little time with you understanding what simple is. But I will say that if you're in a very straightforward, simple environment, uh, maybe you don't need digital transformation. I think digital transformation comes as your supply chain becomes more complex and especially more global. So I've been in companies that have global manufacturing sites, global markets, obviously, a global supplier base, global contract manufacturing. So that becomes quite complex. But as far as convincing management, I've seen some studies by Morgan Swink from Texas Christian University that have showed the financial benefits, so return on investment, return on assets, cost basis, the key financial metrics that every finance person will be focused on. But he's shown the benefits that companies who make fast decisions have, the improvements in financial metrics uh, for companies who have implemented digital twins and advanced planning systems versus companies who have not. And it's quite compelling. We also have quite a few use cases of companies who have implemented our solution. We had one company who said they went from service levels, so this was line fill service levels in the 80s up to the high 90s. It's a pharmaceutical company, so that translates into probably hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue. So, that revenue, protecting your revenue is a very good argument for finance because they're focused on the top line. And the other financial benefit is you typically see significant inventory reductions. So I think you have to make that case. I think you have to go out and find maybe some academic articles that support that, some use cases from other companies, and then even reference calls with those companies to see. But we certainly have people within our company who help companies develop that argument for finance code because it's a very important one. I think, finance is, if you're in supply chain, finance is one of your key customers. And I used to sit in the office of the CFO of Pfizer once a month and explain to him what I was doing to reduce inventory for cash flow purposes.
So I know we are out of time, but just last question. How do you compare Kinaxis value proposition to SAP? Is Kinaxis more focused on supply chain umbrella, supply chain management of the business process?
So let's split out SAP. If you talk about ECC6 or S4, we don't play there. We're not a ERP system, but we suck data out of ERP systems to do what we do. Now, if you look at SAP APO or IBP, that's where we compete with SAP. So we do the planning function and we pass execution signals down to the ERP system. So that's how we compare functionally to SAP. Now, how our value proposition compares to SAP, I would refer you back to the Gartner Magic Quadrant that I showed you earlier. Obviously, you saw we were top right. SAP is in the middle. They're not even seen as leading in the area of supply chain planning, supply chain management functionality. So SAP was the first. They were the first, integrated solution. It's always been fantastic to be fully integrated with their ERP system. So that's, integration. Obviously, they're very strong because it's all their system. But from a functionality point of view, they have really lagged and have not kept up with the industry. And so we have a lot of customers who tried to implement IBP and failed, so they came to us. We had one customer, the one with the 17 instances of SAP ERP, who SAP was so aggressive, they offered IBP for free, and the customer still decided to go with us because they needed the functionality we have. So I think, from a value proposition, we compare very well to SAP, and we're seen as delivering superior value than SAP.
In the area of integrated business planning, in the area of S&OP. So are you more
Yeah.
for make to stock or make to order or engineer to order? Kinaxis.
We can accomplish in that single platform. We accommodate whatever the business strategy is. So we have make to order We're in the aerospace industry, so they're a pure make-to-order industry with very long lead times, as you imagine. I'd say most of our companies are make-to-stock, but we do have a lot of make-to-order customers, and even engineer-to-order. So we accommodate all that functionality. We are one platform, but very configurable. And if customers are asking for new algorithms or whatever, then we develop it for them, but it becomes available to all of our customers. So for instance, in the pharma world, expiry dating is very important for them. If they have product in the market that's expiring, they need to know that so that they make more product to replace that product that will expire before it's consumed. And so we built special functionality to look at expiry dating and to plan for product that's expiring before it's consumed. So, and as soon as we implemented that, that became available in the entire platform. And then, interestingly enough, we had microchip manufacturers that became interested in that functionality. So,
Sure. Thank you very much. I would like to thank you and give you a simple appreciation certificate. So we are very grateful for your support and having the time to spend with us.
oh, thank
Okay.
you so much. Thank you. I really
We
enjoyed this session today. I hope we have more.
Yes, we want more and more because we are all interested to learn more about how you made this solution for S&OP. Thank you very much. And it
Oh,
has
yeah,
been always people run it on Excel, and they don't know you have such a great solution.
yeah, and I'll be the first one to say we're not the only one who has these types of solutions. We're seen as the best, but there are other solutions out there. So the industry has changed tremendously. So thank you for the invitation. I thank you for spending time with me today.
We thank you a lot. We thank everyone who joined us today. And it's always quite a great learning experience. Thanks. Great session. People write you, thank you, and great session. Thank you
I'm
very
happy to
much
hear
for
that.
sharing the invaluable experience.
Thank
People,
you.
thank you, and they write you. Thank you very much. Okay. Have a nice
Okay.
weekend.
You
Okay.
too.
See you.
Goodbye.
Bye. Bye.